Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel, and if you're new here, welcome to Tall Guy Reads. My name is Alex, and today I'm going to be walking you through what is probably one of the most difficult rankings I've done on this channel so far. My top 10 books of 2022. Let's do it. Okay, so overall I read 86 books in 2022. That is by far the most books I've ever read in a single calendar year, and I'm both extremely proud of the number of books that I read, but more importantly, the quality of the books that I read. I was doing a lot of catch up on fantasy and science fiction series that I had missed over the last couple of years, and people have been raving about and trying to get me to read them for so long. And I was reading them back to back to back in 2022 that it resulted in a significant amount of amazing reads that I tackled in 2022. Because of that, that made putting together this list extremely difficult. There were so many amazing reads I wanted to choose from, and in order to make this list as representative and as accurate of all the books that I read and enjoyed in 2022, I decided to first restrict this list to one book per author. I've read multiple series and trilogies and multiple books by a few authors that I easily could have filled this list with multiple books by one or two authors, and it would still be a lot of books I really enjoyed. But I wanted to make it a little bit more interesting, so I am restricting this to one book per author, and in addition to that, I will also not be including any rereads on this list, which isn't as big of a deal because I only reread 2 books in 2022. One final note. This list is ranked from 10 to 1 based solely on my subjective experience and my personal opinions and feelings towards each of these books after reading and sitting with them since. These are my opinions, and while I am sure a number of these may change as time goes on in terms of where they are on this list or if they're even on this list, I am as confident as I possibly can be in this ranking as of the recording of this video. So without any further hesitation, let's dive into my top 10 reads of 2022, starting with spot number 10. In 10th place, and to kick off this list, we have a book that completely took me by surprise in just how much I ended up loving it. That is The Darkness That Comes Before by R. Scott Baker. Yes, The Darkness That Comes Before, book 1 of the Prince of Nothing trilogy, which is the first 3 books in the overall Second Apocalypse series, is a book that takes place in a world that is reeling from an apocalyptic event that happened 2,000 years ago in the past. In the future, or in the present time that where the story is taking place, this world is still very much uncertain. There's a lot of dysfunction in the organization of society and the different class structures and the different culture relationships between all the different lands and different cultures within this world. And at the beginning of this book, there is an announcement of a holy war. And as a result, all these different players within the world freak out. And they start reacting and responding to this in different ways. And as the reader, you are going through each of the different POVs of these main couple of characters as you're watching how they react and respond to this announcement of a holy war. In some instances, you have characters that are trying to use it for their personal gain. In others, you have some characters who are trying to, use it to pursue a lifelong mission that they have been chasing their entire lives. And for others, you have some that are trying to use this announcement of a holy war in order to join something that is greater than them, and feel like they are giving themselves more power to their day-to-day life. All of the different characters that you are following in this first book come from extremely different areas of society. You have one that is at the very tippy top. You have one that is completely from a different culture. You have another that is at the very bottom of the social and societal ladder. And it's just very interesting to watch how all of them work together, work against each other, or, respond to this holy announcement of a holy war. And I think one of my favorite things about this book in general that just absolutely got my attention from the get-go is the political intrigue, because this book is so much politics. It's crazy. Through dialogue and through different political actions, you are watching how different parties, especially those in power, are using this holy war for their own personal gain or in order to pursue a cause that they think would benefit their nation or their people or even themselves specifically. And this is just so fascinating, and there's so much of it in this book. And I really love political intrigue, and I think R. Scott Baker completely took me by surprise in just how good he was at writing political intrigue, because I went into this book not expecting that. I went into this book expecting a lot of great character development, and that is absolutely what I got. But the political intrigue was just the cherry on the top and was absolutely the biggest reason, in addition to the characters, why I fell in love with this book. But yes, The Darkness That Comes Before by R. Scott Baker is number 10 on this list. I love this book. I have not stopped thinking about this book since reading it, and I'm so excited to continue on with the series. All right, so in ninth place, we have a book that has been sitting on my TBR for years, and I finally read it, and I'm so happy I did. That, of course, is Hyperion by Dan Simmons. I truly think that Hyperion is something special. While I haven't had the best of luck with the other Dan Simmons books that I read in 2022, I still look back on Hyperion very fondly, and I think I can unequivocally say that this is a great book. The plot of Hyperion revolves around 7 travelers who are making a final pilgrimage to the planet of Hyperion, to the time tombs, which are these mysterious time-altering tombs that exist on Hyperion and are guarded by this mysterious, menacing figure known as the Shrike. Along the journey, each of these travelers tell their tale of how they got there, who they are, where they are going to, what they are trying to get out of this mission, and what their purpose is to be on this pilgrimage to begin with. And this is really what Hyperion, the first book, is about. It's told in a similar way to Canterbury Tales in that the entire story really revolves around each of these different characters' tales, and you go through and listen to each of these characters tell their story. And it results in an extremely interesting narrative structure that I very much enjoyed and thought was executed exceptionally well in this first book. And in the book, throughout each of these individual pilgrims' tales, you are listening to them explore themes such as love, family, honor, death, life, rebirth, religion, and it just provides for a very profound read. And I think that what's the beauty of this type of narrative structure is that because each story is exploring something a little bit different, as a reader, there is a good chance that you will at least latch on to some of this. You may not latch on to every single story. I didn't love every single story within this book, but the ones that really will resonate with you will resonate with you. At least they did for me. I think for me, the Priest's Tale and the Scholar's Tale were some of the best short fiction I've read in my life. And I don't read a lot of short fiction, which is why I'm pretty confident when I say that. But I think in addition to that, I think these were just exceptionally well written 50-page narratives between these two characters. But this is a book that I think is just very special. I think it absolutely deserves its recognition as a sci-fi pillar. I think that everyone's praise of Hyperion is absolutely well-founded, and I'm very happy I read this book. I think another beauty of Hyperion is that if you're not a huge science fiction fan, you could probably pick this up and still really enjoy the story, because even though it is science fiction in a lot of ways, and there is a lot of techno jargon, it very much is a story about people and about humanity and exploring, the ins and outs of humanity, the reality of human nature. And I just think it's a very interesting story. Hyperion is the 9th place book on this list. I really enjoyed this book. I haven't really stopped thinking about it since, at least a few of the stories within it. And I'm very much looking forward to rereading it in the future. All right, so moving into spot number 8, we have Jade War by Fonda Lee. Jade War is the second book in the Greenbone saga, which is a trilogy of books that revolve around the Call family, which is one of 2 crime syndicate families that operate in the island of Kakon within the city of Janloon. And it talks about how they are battling their rival clan in order for control of the island and for this natural resource known as Jade, which is this magical lifeblood of the island of Kakon, which basically gives certain wearers enhanced abilities. I love Jade City. I loved it so much. I've said it before. I said it in my November wrap-up. It was on this list before I read Jade War. I loved everything about that book. The world building, the characters, the action, everything about it was just so fresh, so different, and I was absolutely hooked when I read that first book. Jade War was everything I loved about Jade City ramped up. I mean everything. I mean, the politics was on a whole nother level here. This was some of the best political intrigue I have read this year. I loved it so much, and I could not get enough of the political intrigue in this book. The overall world building expands significantly, just in both geography, but also in information you were getting about the history of Jade and how the history of the clans within this world, and it is just absolutely fascinating. But more than anything else in this story, the characters. The characters of the Greenbone Saga are some of my favorite characters I have read in a long time, and they are only in 2 books that I've read so far. These characters are phenomenal, and while I love them in Jade City, Jade War is what absolutely threw me over the edge when it came to I want nothing bad to happen to these characters. I'm sure they will, but I'm not ready for it, and I'm very excited to see what they can accomplish. Hopefully they can accomplish what they're setting out for in the final book. Jade War is emotional, it is heavy hitting, it is exciting, it is jaw dropping, it is pulse pounding. I mean, I could not put this book down. Once I hit like the 40% mark of this book, I was clenching the pages all the way through because the tension was so palpable the entire time. On top of that, one of the things that I absolutely love about the Greenbone saga, and I'm so grateful for Fauna Lee for doing, is that in a world where she has really interesting magic systems, she has a very interesting world building set up, she could have easily gone for a fast-paced, high-action fantasy that very much focuses on the action side of things. And while that probably would have been good, and I do not doubt that I would have enjoyed that book or anything, I am so happy that she decided not to do that and instead focus on telling a story about the characters and the family and love and honor and tradition and mistakes and human nature at the center. And that is the forefront of the Greenbone saga. And while I recognize that in Jade City, Jade War is absolutely where that paid off. And the family relationships between all of the characters in the story and all of the character relationships within this book were phenomenal. But yes, Jade War is an absolutely phenomenal book. It is number 8 on this list. I am so excited to have it on this list. I was so glad I was able to read it by the end of the year because it is one of the best books I read this year. I absolutely loved everything about Jade War. All right, so let's talk about 7th place. In 7th place of my top 10 books of 2022, we have The Passenger by Cormac McCarthy. At its core, The Passenger revolves around Bobby Western, who is a salvage diver, and one day on the job, he goes and dives underneath the ocean to go to a plane accident where he sees that the plane's black box, the pilot's flight bag, and the 10th passenger are missing from the plane. This leads to a bunch of mystery and basically results in men in badges pursuing him. It leads to Bobby pursuing the ghost of his father, who is one of the inventors of one of the most world-shattering weapons ever created in world history, as well as the pursuit of his sister, who is the love and ruin of his soul. The Passenger is a journey that follows Bobby as he grapples with all of these. It follows Bobby as he goes across the American South, and it explores religion, explores morality, explores science, explores human nature, it explores life after death, it explores life and death, it explores the madness that is human consciousness. Cormac McCarthy is one of the most important authors in my life. There are a handful of authors that have been major pillars of my relationship with reading throughout my life and have either brought me back into reading, have either really sparked a huge passion for a certain type of reading, and Cormac McCarthy is absolutely one of those. And I just love his prose. I love his world, how he explores his worldview in his books, and I just love his writing. And I think even though The Passenger is probably not my favorite book that he's ever written, I definitely think it is a very strong book. And I think it's a phenomenal story. I think it absolutely was worth the wait in terms of the 16-year gap between this and The Road, which was his previous book published in 2006. And in addition to that, I also think The Passenger is made stronger by his companion book, which is Stella Maris, which is an absolutely devastating, one of the bleakest Cormac McCarthy books I've ever read, which is Saying Something Huge. And that only made me want to reread The Passenger. But both of these books together result in an incredibly unique reading experience that I won't forget going through for the first time. And I'm very excited to reread this in the future. This is absolutely one of those books I could totally see rising up on this list specifically, but also just overall in my ranking of Cormac McCarthy books as I reread it more in the future, and maybe as I'm at different points in my life. The Passenger, I love it. I love this book so much. I can totally see why someone wouldn't like this book, but for me, it hit all the right notes. I love Cormac McCarthy's writing, and I thought it was as strong as it's ever been here in The Passenger. All right, well, one more book before we hit the top 5. Let's talk about spot number 6, which of course is The Dark Forest by Cixin Liu. This is book 2 of the Remembrance of Earth's Past trilogy, and I knew I was going to put at least one book from this trilogy on this list because I love this series so much. It's one of the most thought-provoking series I've ever have read, and I genuinely have not stopped thinking about this series since finishing it. But while a lot of people would probably say Death's End as their favorite of these 3 books, for me, it has to be The Dark Forest. I loved this book, and I really have found that I love a good middle book, and I think The Dark Forest is one of the best middle books of a trilogy I've read in quite a while. I think it does a phenomenal job of taking everything that was set up in the Three Body Problem book 1 and taking it in a new direction, showing how humans will react to all the events that happened in that first book and setting up for the main bulk of the trilogy, which leads into the rest of The Dark Forest as well as into Death's End. It is just a phenomenal read. I mean, this is just such a good book. I loved it. It's an extremely thought-provoking, fascinating, terrifying, wonderful story that absolutely had my imagination firing on all cylinders when I was reading this book. And it all led to a conclusion that is one of my favorite endings to any science fiction fantasy book that I've read in a long time. And I think that the ending itself is pretty terrifying. It installs an idea. It basically sets up an idea or a theory that in my mind is one of the most interesting theories I've ever read about in a science fiction book, and had me going on the internet, looking up videos, looking up Reddit articles, looking up just regular scientific journals, trying to figure out what if anyone has actually studied this theory after this book came out, because it is just so fascinating, it's terrifying, and I loved that about it. Pretty quickly into that research quest, I realized that yes, I should probably just start book 3 instead of spoiling myself by stumbling upon something on the internet. So that's exactly what I did, and I love Death's End, but for me, The Dark Forest is my favorite. I just think the pacing is excellent. I thought the characters were my favorite in the trilogy. I thought the actual events that happened were fantastic, and again, the ending is so good. So yes, The Dark Forest is number 6 on this list. I love this book so much, and if you were thinking about picking up this trilogy, if you're interested in hard science fiction that tackles some very, very interesting and terrifying concepts and ideas, I absolutely would highly recommend this trilogy. I think it's fantastic, and The Dark Forest is one of my favorite science fiction books I've ever read. All right, so here we are, the top 5 books I read in 2022. What is number 5? Well, we are going to kind of stay in the little science fiction area for a minute, but instead of talking about hard science fiction, we're going to turn to the root of post-apocalyptic fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy type story. And that, of course, is Swan Song by Robert McCammon. Before picking up this book, I had heard from a number of people that if you are a fan of Stephen King, you actually should check out this guy named Robert McCammon. And so as a result, I've had him on my TBR for years. I've always wanted to get to him, but it just never happened until this year when it finally came into fruition, when I read this epic, sprawling, post-apocalyptic, nightmarish quest known as Swan Song. This book is fantastic, taking place in an America that has been ravaged by nuclear war. You are following characters such as Sister Creep, Swan, Sue Wanda Prescott, you are following Josh Hutchins, you are following Roland Croninger, you are following Colonel Macklin and the Man with a Scarlet Eye. You are following them on this epic journey that is just absolutely non-stop, relentless paced all the way through the end. This is one of the most well-paced horror books I've ever read. I think the second I started picking up this book, I couldn't really put it down because I needed to see what was going to happen with the nuclear war and see what was going to happen to America and how it was going to look after everything was ravaged by a nuclear war. And as soon as I started getting introduced to the characters and the story started really getting set up, I just could not stop reading it. And this book, I flew through it. It's 850, 900 pages in the paperback version I have, or whatever it may be. And I read this in just a couple of days. I just could not stop reading it. I thought it was just so good. The characters were phenomenal. The scenes were terrifying. There were some genuinely creepy, terrifying scenes in this book. There were some just awesome moments, some awesome character moments that both had this very intimate character moment feel, but also these huge climactic events occurring in the story. And all of this led to a phenomenal ending that just really capitalized on all this exceptional character development, all this great world building, all this amazing buildup that has been set up throughout this entire book all the way to the end. And from there on, it was just a fantastic adventure. I loved this book so much. Swan Song absolutely stands on its own as a pillar of science fiction horror. I think it is a fantastic story and is one of the best books I've read in 2022. It's one of my favorite books I've read in a number of years. And that, of course, Swan Song, number 5 on this list. And I love this book so freaking much. Well, one more book before we reach the top 3 books I read in 2022. Let's talk Sun Eater. Yes, in 4th place of the top 10 books I've read in 2022, we have Demon in White by Christopher Ruocchio, book number 3 of the Sun Eater series. Holy freaking moly, I cannot even tell you how much I love this book. This book is fantastic. I think it is absolutely dynamite from beginning to end in the same way that Swan Song is, just relentless pace, perfectly paced book for the size. This is the same instance. I am amazed by just how much is packed into the 750 page book, that many authors would probably take multiple books to tell. It is amazing, it is impressive, and it had me at the edge of my seat throughout this entire story. And if you didn't already know, the Sun Eater series is a series of books that revolve around a character named Hadrian Marlowe, who is recounting his life to you, the reader, as he's going through all the events of his life that lead up to the moment where he destroyed a sun, killing 4 billion human lives, as well as completely extinguishing an alien species from existence. Yes, that is something that is told right at the beginning of book 1, so it is not a spoiler, it is just where you know the story is heading eventually, and Demon in White is the third book along the way, and wow, this book is fantastic. I have loved pretty much every book in this series, some more than others, but Demon in White is in a class of its own for me on my personal enjoyment scale. I think this book just has everything I love about the Sun Eater in one book. With Demon in White, everything gets ramped up to 11. Hadrian's character development is at the best it's been. The epic space battles are here, and they are some of the best in the series. The shocking moments that we know are very present in the series are here, and they are some of my favorite. There is a chapter in particular that I've read 3 times because I was trying to grasp my head around what was being revealed to me, because even though I knew what was being revealed, I needed to experience it more than once because it was just so shocking, and it had me just kind of in disbelief when I read the chapter. But overall, this book is just nonstop. It's compulsively readable. Again, Rocchio's prose is fantastic, and how Rocchio controls the prose and the writing style in order to tell different parts of the story and how different parts of Hadrian's past based on who Hadrian is as a person at the certain event that he is telling about within the story. It's so interesting. It's done so well. And I just think overall the series is fantastic, and Demon in White just knocks everything I love about Sun Eater out of the park. This is hands down one of my favorite science fiction books I have ever read. Demon in White holds a very special place in my heart. I love this book. I thought it did a fantastic job of, again, combining everything I loved but all of the other books into one book that was just an extremely enjoyable, pulse-pounding reading experience that had me gripping the pages until the very end. So yes, number 4 on this list on the top 10 books I read in 2022 is Demon in White by Christopher Rocchio. All right, well, here we are, everyone. The top 3 books I read in 2022. And in third place, we have a book that for the longest time this year had held its spot as my number 1 book I read in 2022. What is that book? Well, of course, I am talking about The Wall of Storms by Ken Liu, book 2 of the Dandelion Dynasty. The Wall of Storms is, in my opinion, an absolutely incredible book. It is the second book in the overall Dandelion Dynasty series, which is a series that revolves around the island of Dara and talks about and explores the emergence of a new nation after the destruction of a corrupt old one. Weaving engineering with magic, science with fantasy, East Asian with classical philosophies and traditions, the Dandelion Dynasty on the whole is one of the most unique series I have ever read in fantasy, but have ever read in general. It is just so incredibly different in the best way possible. And while I love all of the books in this series, I mean, Speaking Bones, to be honest, is probably one of my favorite conclusions to any fantasy series I've read. Wall of Storms is my favorite. Like The Dark Forest is for the Remembrance of Earth's Past trilogy, The Wall of Storms kind of operates as the middle book. It basically is the book that takes everything that was set up in The Grace of Kings and takes it in a new direction, shows all the repercussions in the aftermath and the fallout of that first book, but at the same time introduces new threats, introduces new plot elements that end up becoming the main focus of the series on the whole. And that, from Wall of Storms, everything changes. Everything changes for the remainder of the series, and the remainder of the series focuses on something that is introduced within book 2, The Wall of Storms. It is an incredible book. It has some of the best character development in the series in this first book. It has some of my favorite character moments in the series, and there are so many moments of the Dandelion Dynasty that I am constantly continually thinking back on, and I am constantly remembering as just being jaw-dropping moments that had me just like jumping out of my seat, and a number of them are in this book. This book just combines everything I love about this series into one book that is so incredibly well paced, to the point that even though this book is 850 pages, I never felt that at all. The Wall of Storms is my favorite book in the series. It has been since I read the series. I have not stopped thinking about this series since finishing it. And overall, just like the Sun Eater series was, and another series I will get to in a moment, this is just one of my highlights of 2022. The Dandelion Dynasty as a whole is just a phenomenal fantasy science fiction series that I think a lot of people would love if they just gave it a shot. But yes, in third place for my top 10 books of 2022, we have The Wall of Storms by Ken Liu, book 2 of the Dandelion Dynasty. Well, with that said, and with all that anticipation built, what could have possibly passed The Wall of Storms, which was my number one book of the year for the longest time running in 2022? What else did I read in 2022 that would have topped that? Well, first book up, number 2 on this list, is of course Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry. I'm going to be honest here. If I had read this book in any of the prior years over the last 10 years outside of this year, it easily would have been my number one book I read in whatever year I read it in, because this is one of the best books I have ever read. It is one of my all-time favorites, and I genuinely am shocked that it's not my number one book of the year, but here we are. This is a phenomenal story that explores everything I love about storytelling and character development. At its core, Lonesome Dove is a story of several retired Texas Rangers who are driving a cattle herd from Texas all the way to Montana. It is an exploration of love, death, life, hope, hopelessness, family, duty, honor, regret, and just a life well lived. It's an honest, raw look at the American West, and also at the same time, a total deconstruction of the myth surrounding it. This is just a phenomenal story with some of the best character writing I've read in fiction. The two main characters, Augustus McCrae and Woodrow Call, are two of my favorite characters I've read in a long time. These are the two retired Texas Rangers who the story mainly revolves around. And you are watching, they're both older gentlemen, and you're watching as they go through and analyze their life, everything that has happened to them up until this point, all of their lost love, all of their lost friends, all of the regrets that they have. And it's such a profound journey through the eyes of these two older men who are just looking back on everything that they loved and lost in life. The relationships between these two were fantastic. I absolutely fell in love with both these characters. And by the end of this book, I just didn't want this book to end because I just wanted to keep reading more about these two characters. And in addition to that, the other characters in this story, you have a bunch of young characters who are just coming into their own. They're just starting to make a name for themselves. And you have the polar opposite of what Gus and Call are going through and how they are viewing the world as being this open playground basket that they can really just do whatever they want in and really start making a name for themselves and trying to make the best decision possible at the moment that they can make it in. But at the same time, they are young kids and they are flawed, and just as every human is at every point in their life, they will make mistakes. And a lot of this book is about looking at mistakes that have been made, looking about regret, and just finding in the moment, in the present moment, doing the best thing that you are most passionate about. Lonesome Dove is an absolutely beautiful story. It is a story that 100% deserves all the praise and recognition it gets. It totally deserves and 100% deserves the big Pulitzer Prize sticker on the front cover. And it is just a timeless story. I totally see why many authors such as Joe Abercrombie and Stephen King have this rated high amongst their list of all-time favorite books, because this is just a fantastic look at human nature, at regret, at loss, at love, at family, of honor, tradition, and all of these things that we all look for in a lot of our stories, but also in our real life. And we're always trying to do the right thing and make the right decisions. And we just all want to make mistakes. We want to avoid mistakes, but we want to make sure the mistakes we made aren't going to be things that we look back on and wish we had done something different. This story absolutely takes a look at all of that and more. This is one of my favorite books I've read in quite a many number of years, and it just so happens that it ends up being number 2 on this list, but here we are. So yes, number 2 on this list of my top 10 books I read in 2022 is Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry. Well, this has been so much fun. Let me tell you, I love going through and talking about all the books I really enjoy. There's nothing more fun for me as a content creator, especially here on BookTube, than to talk about books that I love, because there's something so special about reading a book, really enjoying it, and then talking with others around it and just seeing what they liked about it, see what they didn't like about it in some instances, and just really analyzing the differences here. And for me, these types of videos are just so much fun because I love all these books I'm talking about, and it's just always a pleasure to talk about the things that I'm passionate about. So with that said, I do want to reinforce the point that because even though this is a top 10 list and these are ranked, and I do 100% stand by the ranking that I'm putting out here in this video today, I do say that every single book on this list is phenomenal. These are the top 10 books I read in 2022, so if they're on this list, I love these books. There's not a book on this list I don't pretty much absolutely love. So I just want to put that reminder. But with that being said, let's talk about my number one book of 2022. What is the book that I held above all the others? The book that out of 86 books I read this year is the one that I give the golden ticket, the golden crown, whatever it may be, the one that you probably have been waiting for, and probably the reason that you clicked on this video to begin with. What is it? Well, Fool's Fate by Robin Hobb. Over the course of the year, I've been making my way through the Realm of the Elderlings, which is a 16-book epic fantasy series built up by 5 sub-series, which include 4 trilogies and 1 quartet. In this year, I was able to read 11 of the 16 books, so I read the first 3 trilogies, as well as the first 2 books of the Rainwild Chronicles quartet, which I will be continuing in 2023. But out of all of these, and this is very difficult, because there were a number of books within the series that I would, if I was including multiple books by the same author, would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on this list. I have to say Fool's Fate is my favorite book I've read so far by Robin Hobb, but also the Realm of the Elderlings. And I just think this is one of the most emotional reading experiences I've ever had in my reading career at this point. Fool's Fate is the third and final book of the Tawny Man trilogy, which is the third trilogy of the Realm of the Elderlings and the 9th book in the series. This is the 6th book that is featured Fifth Chivalry Farseer, because the middle 3 books, the Live Street Traders trilogy, is an entirely new cast of characters told in multi-POV in a different area of this world. Fool's Fate was originally intended to be the final book of the Realm of the Elderlings. This was it. This was the 9th book in the series. This was the end of the 3rd trilogy. This was where Robin Hobb and everyone else involved in this project had originally intended for this story to end. And you can absolutely see that in this book. This is the full culmination of everything that we have seen up to this point when it comes to the character of Fifth Chivalry Farseer, when it comes to the Fool, when it comes to any other characters involved in this story up until this point. It is the full culmination of everything that is set up for you in Farseer, in the Farseer books, as well as even some of the world building and the messages and the lore that is set up in the Live Street Traders trilogy. It all comes together perfectly in just a beautiful and heavily emotional journey here in the Tawny Man trilogy, but more specifically Fool's Fate. As I've said multiple times, and as many other people can attest to, Robin Hobb is one of the best character writers in the game. She is phenomenal, and the way she handles character perspective, especially in the Fitz books, because everything is told in first person, and how she uses that first person to not only develop Fitz as a character and his internal and external qualities, but also all the characters surrounding him, is next level. And Fool's Fate is all of that paid off. All of the slower moments, all of the moments that are very emotional and intimate within the first couple of books, all of the books leading up to this book, have such a huge payoff in this book. I can't even say it enough. I mean, there are some slower moments in this book, of course, like any Robin Hobb book, but in the best way possible. That is not a negative. These are moments that I want to just linger. I want these moments to just last as long as they possibly can, because I don't want to leave. I want to spend as much time as I can with these characters. And the story here is just fantastic. I mean, in addition to the characters, the world building here is awesome. It is just connecting a lot of the loose threads that we have seen set up in the previous books in a way that makes sense. It doesn't seem forced or anything. It doesn't seem like she was trying to pull together things that she had written randomly into one cohesive narrative. No, this seems like something that she had organized and outlined for years in advance and then wrote down on paper, and it just came together perfectly. Not everything is tied up. Thankfully, there's plenty of loose threads and plenty of loose plot lines that won't be tied up in this book. And I mean, there are 7 more books to come now that we know that she went on to write 2 more sub-series. But in and of itself, Fool's Fate is just an incredible book. It's an absolutely fantastic look at trauma, a fantastic look at family, at honor, at tradition, about what is the right thing to do as a human nature. And I just love this book so much. Fool's Fate, in my opinion, is an absolute masterpiece. It's one of the best fantasy books I've ever read. It is the best book I read in 2022. And I'm so excited to continue on with the Realm of the Elderlings in the new year, because I know there are 3 more Fitz books to come. There is the Fitz and the Fool trilogy, which are the final 3 books in the series. And I don't know if I'm emotionally ready for those 3 books, but I can't wait to read them nonetheless. But yes, my number 1 book of 2022, my favorite book that I read this year, is book 3 of the Tawny Man trilogy, Fool's Fate by Robin Hobb. All right, so there you have it. Those are my top 10 books I read in 2022. It's crazy. I can't believe the year is over. It was a crazy fast year in a lot of ways. It really felt like it flew by, but I am so proud of the reading side of it. I read so many books that I absolutely loved. And I did spend a lot of time reading a lot of series of fantasy and science fiction and even horror and some contemporary fiction that I had a good feeling I would like, that had been on my TBR for quite some time, but I never got to until this year, where I just sat down. I ended up reading a lot of things back to back to back to back that I ended up loving. And it really made this list and putting together this list very difficult, but I wouldn't change it at all. I loved my reading year this year. I loved all the books on this list. I am so confident in the top 10 list I have here in this moment right now. And for sure, the top book I read this year, Fool's Fate. I love that book so much. One of my favorite books I've ever read in fantasy. And I'm so happy to share my love for it as my top book that I read in 2022. So with that said, I would love to know, what is your number one read of 2022? What is your biggest surprise of 2022? What is the biggest disappointment of 2022? Whatever it may be, let me know in the comments below, because I would love to hear about your reading year. But with all that said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoyed this content. If you did, please think about subscribing, hitting that bell notification down below if you want to get updates of new videos as they come out. Hitting that like button, it helps me out, helps the channel out a lot, and I really appreciate it. But with all that said, I hope you guys have a fantastic day and new year.